Boston College's most critical game of the season in 2024 is not even going to be an ACC matchup. I'll explain what I mean on today's show.
You are Locked On Boston College, your daily podcast on the Boston College Eagles, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everyone, and welcome. This is Locked On Boston College. I'm your host, AJ Black. I'm the editor and publisher of Eagle Insider, part of the 247 Network. Please make sure to check that out. Today's episode is brought to you by LinkedIn. These days, every new potential hire can feel like a high-stakes wager for your small business. That's why LinkedIn Jobs helps find the right people for your team faster and for free. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. Terms and conditions apply. All right, we got three big things we are talking about on today's episode of Locked On BC. We're going to look at the biggest game of the season for Boston College football. It's one you're probably going to guess by the picture if you're on YouTube. Second one, we're going to look at a new transfer target for basketball. We'll look at who that is and what he could bring to the team and what other factors are in play here. And finally, an interesting report that came out on Twitter about spending in football, basketball, and Olympic sports compared to the rest of the schools in the ACC and the rest of the country. You're going to want to hear where BC falls in that report. We'll get into all that on today's show. So let's kick this off. We're now 3 months, 3+ months away from college football returning. It feels like it just ended, right? Didn't it feel like that we were just celebrating Thomas Castellanos' big touchdown win over SMU? But it's coming, and everyone's talking. We're into off-season mode, and I wanted to mention. We've mentioned it here and there, but what's the most critical game of the season? And you ask some people, and they're entitled to their opinion. Many people are saying the FSU game. And I that's not the view I have because FSU is a juggernaut right now, and they're playing exceptionally well every season that they've had Mike Norvell, and it just seems like they're just getting better and better. So I don't think that is going to be a good barometer of like what should be like the game that kind of tilts where the season goes. Missouri, kind of the same thing because they're going to be a team that's going to be very good next year. No, for me, the team that I think is the most critical game of the season is another out-of-conference game. And no, it's not Duquesne. And no, it's not Western Kentucky. It's Michigan State. The Spartans are, if you looked on paper from last year, they weren't a very good team. But they were in the midst of firing their head coach. Early in the season for that, whatever happened with the sexual harassment stuff that happened. I know they just dropped all this stuff against Mel Tucker, but whatever happened there, right? They lost most of their roster to the transfer portal. They have regained quite a bit, and I believe they have a top 10 transfer portal class. Much of that is due to the fact that they had to get warm bodies because like 40 of their players left. But they brought talented guys in. They brought in guys like Aiden Childs of Oregon State, who was a 4-star quarterback. And you go up and down their transfer portal class list, and it's, there's quite a few 4-stars that they're bringing in. And that's if you're using 247's transfer portal ranking. It's not just their high school portal ranking. So they're doing a nice job of rebuilding themselves. There's guys coming in from schools like Miami and Oregon, Nebraska, Cincinnati, LSU, UNC, Georgia Tech. So they've got guys coming from good programs over to hopefully rebuild. And, they lost 38 players in the portal. They've already brought in 24. I don't think they're done yet. They're one of those schools that can pretty much continue to add on and fix whatever holes that they found that they were missing during spring practice. So Michigan State is going to be hungry, and you talk about good coaches. They're bringing in a new head coach to replace Mel Tucker, who was a disaster, with Jonathan Smith, who is one of the most highly thought of coaches in college football, in an underrated head coach as well. It's not like he's not like a Kirby Smart or Nick Saban, who's like a highly thought of coach. He's a guy that brought Oregon State into a really, really good place in the Pac-12. Like, just think about like 10 years ago, 15 years ago, Oregon State was putrid. They've never really been a good program. And then Jonathan Smith, he brings in DJ Uiagalelei, and he has that Damian Martinez, their running back. They're beating Oregon. They're doing all sorts of stuff. I think they had like 9 or 10 wins this last year. He's a very good coach, and he's a good offensive coach. He's a tough guy that's going to have this team ready. This could be a critical piece of where BC is going to be, a critical moment of where BC is going. Because, yeah, it would be great to start the season off with a win against Missouri or a win against Florida State. But if you look at the odds, SP Plus, I think, has both of them at like 10% for BC to win. I think 19% for them to beat Florida State, 10% to beat Missouri. That's a tough sell. That is a tough way to begin. But if BC goes into let's just say they go into the Michigan State game 1-2. They lose those 2 games. They beat Duquesne. You beat Michigan State, and I'm gonna guess that that's gonna be the red bandana game. It's a home game around September 11th, probably one of their biggest games at home this season. I'm guessing that's going to be the red bandana game. You beat them. You then have the potential to rip off wins against Western Kentucky, Virginia. So now you're 4-2. You have Virginia Tech and Louisville, but that gives you some a jumping off point, right? A way to get your season going in the right direction. It's not like you're just battling here and there, and you're getting like your losses and not getting any momentum going. This game against Michigan State could really be a moment where BC stakes their flag. They place their flag and say, look, yeah, we lost to 2 top 10 teams, but this team here that I'm sure people are going to love Michigan State. People fall in love with transfer portal teams all the time, and some of them are successful, some are not. But you know, I'm sure they're going to like them. So if BC can go out there and say, "Look, we can battle a team like this," Michigan State is on par with some other teams that you have on your schedule. The Syracuses, the SMUs, the um, UNCs. So all of a sudden now you're feeling good that this team can battle a game like that. And let's look at the flip side of this. If you lose this game, your season all of a sudden is starting to look really, really rough. You're now 1-3, and you're starting to wonder where this team could go. So that is why I think the Michigan State game is absolutely critical, and it's a home game. It's got to be won. This is it, one game that Bill O'Brien can't afford to lose on his schedule. And you can argue, as I said, Florida State. And I said earlier on another episode, Syracuse could be up there too. Like just beating Fran Brown is a big deal. But I think where this game falls on the schedule makes it a critical one, and one the Eagles cannot afford to lose. In a moment, let's talk a little bit about some basketball updates. We'll look at a new target and look at who that is. And I'm sure he's someone you've never heard of, but we'll explain why he could be critical to BC's season next year if they can land him. I'll tell you all about him in just a moment. When you're hiring for your small role, no one does it better than LinkedIn. LinkedIn has the tools to help you find the right professionals for your team faster and for free. LinkedIn isn't just a job board. LinkedIn helps you hire professionals you just can't find anywhere else. Even those who aren't for those of people who aren't actively searching, LinkedIn's going to help you find them too, because 70% of LinkedIn users don't visit other leading job sites. So if you're not on there, you're looking at the wrong place. You're not doing what you should be. LinkedIn knows that small businesses are wearing so many hats and might not have the time or resources to hire. LinkedIn is constantly finding ways to make the process easier. So post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. That's linkedin.com/lockedoncollege to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. Locked On Boston College, AJ Black here. And as we have been saying, Boston College basketball is in an interesting spot. We'll just leave it at that. They've lost so much talent, whether it's Jaden Zachary, Devin McLaughlin, Quentin Post, you name it, they're gone. And Earl Grant is put in this unenviable role of trying to rebuild a program with limited NIL, well, not limited, but not the huge banks that like a Louisville has or some of these other bigger programs. So he has to, I don't want to say be frugal, but he's got to be smart with what he's doing to bring players in. And I think all along he's been looking for guys that are hungry. And there's nothing wrong with that. Like bringing in guys that are hungry to play, to win, and to show people that they're wrong is a lot a better system sometimes than bringing in 5 stars that have just bombed at different places and don't really seem to figure things out. I feel like if you bring in a guy that's got talent, that is playing at a lower level and is successful and really wants to play at another level, that's a good thing to do. If you bring in a guy that is, you know, played over at a higher level and has the talent, like Josh Beadle, for instance, who didn't do much for Clemson, and he's hungry to show people that they're wrong, that's a good thing. And that brings me to the point of this segment because BC basketball has been very silent about who they've been targeting in the transfer portal. You hear about it after the fact, but you don't really usually hear the targets because the staff is just quiet about it. They want to keep things silent. And that's okay. I mean, I'm a guy who tries to find the scoops for you. Basketball's been tough. But the newest name was put on Twitter this week, and it was a guy, and I don't even know who he was. I'd give him credit if I had his name in front of me, but he said that southeastern southeastern Louisiana guard Roger McFarlane was on campus for an official visit, and he also visited Temple. Now, McFarlane, I had to do some research because, I don't know, I didn't know what Southeast Louisiana University was. I had to look up, like, I'm like, wonder what their mascot is. They're the Lions. Who is this guy? So, McFarlane is a guy who came to SLU from a JUCO. He played at Dodge City Junior College, which is an amazing name if you like Western movies. And he played and was named to the Southland preseason All Conference team. He played quite a bit this last season. He was NABC All District. He averaged 15 points per game. He also shot. I'm trying to find you the stats as we're talking. He, give me a second, shot 58 three pointers for 34%. He was a 77% free throw shooter and had 8 points. He's a good rebounder too, 8.6 rebounds per game. So I don't know this school from anything. I have never heard of them before. I had to look up who they played and what conference they're in, the Southland Conference, I guess. But the interesting thing, the one point that I thought that I was like, okay, was that he played his best game this past season was against Auburn. And Auburn obviously was one of the best. I think they either did or was right up there to win the SEC. He scored 24 points in that game. He only shot 40%, but he shot 57% from 3-point range and had 11 rebounds. So he's able to do that against a bigger school. Now, I saw some articles out there that he was interested in Temple, that Gonzaga. There's a couple other bigger schools that are looking at him. I saw also the basketball coaches are always into like teases, and Adam Walsh, who is like the head of personnel, it's a great day to be an Eagle with a GIF thing going on. So maybe they landed him. I don't know. They don't like to talk about it. So maybe this is a guy they got. Now, would he be successful at BC? I have no idea. I don't. He's successful at this level. That's great. Would he be successful as an ACC level wing or guard? I don't know. But you need at this point, BC needs warm bodies, and he's talented enough that I could look at him and say, okay, he's done some things. Maybe he could do it here. Maybe if they coach him up and get him up to that level, Roger McFarland would be as successful, playing at the 2 or the 3 for BC. Um, is he going to be a star? I doubt it. I don't think he's going to be a guy that changes the tenor of next year. Is he a guy that could contribute and be successful here? I think that's a better chance. But would he be a star? I don't think so. And that is kind of what he does. Like, he is a guy who can score. He's a guy who can shoot 3-pointers. He's not the most accurate. It reminds me a lot of the Claudell Harris stuff, right? Claudell Harris came from another program, Charleston Southern, that really under the radar. And to credit Harris's credit, he came here and at times was lightning in a bottle when BC needed it. Other times he was just lost, but he was lightning in a bottle at times when Boston College needed it, especially in scoring. And when he got hot, he got real hot. If this guy can do some of that, if McFarland can do some of that, that would be a fine get for BC. Now, don't know. We'll have to find out. There's pictures of him in a BC uniform at his official visit. There's pictures of him in a Temple uniform too, but we'll have to wait to see that. Now, before we get into our last segment, also interesting to note that BC was going to play in a multi-team tournament in Mohegan Sun next season, and the multi-team tournament was going to be Temple, UMass, and Providence. And Providence bailed out because they got invited to, I think it was the Battle of Atlantis, which is a big one. So now it's down to BC, UMass, and Temple. There's plenty of local schools that can take Providence's place. And it's a bummer because Providence is easily the best team in that group. And you want to play good teams, right? That's part of the fun, right? So BC's gonna have the tournament's gonna have to figure out another guy, a team to play. And I don't know, I'm not gonna go looking through what local teams have already signed in for other multi-team tournaments, but you name it, you would be a fine alternative. Harvard, UMass Lowell's been playing pretty well the last couple of years. You could do URI. You could do Bryant's hasn't been very good. Those are a couple teams. I'm just thinking of a few at the top. Vermont's been pretty good. You could get John Becker down here, right? So that's just a little quick nugget there that that tournament needs another team. We'll have to wait to see who replaces Providence, and we'll find that out in a couple weeks. So in our final segment, I want to look at some financial numbers that were released and talk about where BC lands in terms of spending, because BC always gets that the mantra that they're cheap. Are they cheap? We'll talk about it in just a moment. It's winner take all time in the NBA and NHL, and FanDuel's giving you a shot to bring home a big win of your own. I was telling you guys, folks, the last couple games, I picked against the Bruins twice because I just felt like their season was done. And I got bit on game 6. I figured that game was the one that without Marchand, I thought they were done. But game 7, I was like, yeah, they're definitely done. And you make your choice and you win with it sometimes. Right now, new customers, if you want to try that out, get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 to bet on spreads, money lines, player props, and more. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and make every playoff shot count with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. This is Locked On Boston College. I am your host, AJ Black. And I was saying before we went to our commercial break that BC has they have a aura around them that many people just think of them as cheap. And it's been part of this whole ACC lawsuits that we've seen from Clemson and Florida State and all these other things, is that these bigger schools feel like they're spending a ton of money, and that the smaller schools, or the schools that aren't as invested in football, are not keeping up their end of the bargain, causing this huge gap in talent and making the ACC really top heavy. I think there's some truth to what FSU says. I hate saying that because I don't want to acknowledge anything that group says. But there was an interesting report out on Twitter this week, and it was by a analytics consultant, Tony Altmore, who grabbed data from the Department of Education and found out the amount of money spent by each school. Now, I can't verify that what this guy is saying is true. I'm just telling you this is what he reported, and I kind of want to bounce off of some of the things he said. So here's the data. Here's what we see for football. This football's king, right? Everyone wants to talk about football. You look at the ACC, and what do you see if you're on YouTube? You see that Florida State has spent $76.5 million for the financial year 2023, while BC spent $33 million. And in dead last at $26 million is Syracuse. So I think back to when BC hired Bill O'Brien, and I look at one of the comments that we heard, which is that BC was going to be serious about spending more money to get them up into that upper echelon of the ACC. Now, when you look at the data too, I think it's also important. I saw FSU site mention this that money that makes it look like FSU is spending way more than everyone else. That also includes buyout money. And I believe they said there's 2 coaches that they're buying out. So that might bring the number more down, down a little bit compared to other schools. Miami's also way up there too, but they also have a buyout, and Notre Dame is way up there. They do not have a buyout. So they are the 3 like kings. And then actually when you look at Clemson, they're down about, compared to Florida State. Florida State has $76 million. Clemson has $57 million. Still much, much, much more than some of these other schools that are in the ACC. But it shows you that BC is still, and they are 7th from the bottom. So they're not the basement. They are higher than Louisville, which is incredible. Stanford, Wake Forest, NC State, which is crazy. SMU, Virginia, and Syracuse. BC's higher than all of them. But honestly, if you look at the numbers, it's like a million here or there. So BC is still near the bottom. Now, if you were to put BC in the SEC, just if you're having a fun thing with that, they are only higher. They're only higher than Mississippi State. They'd actually be lower than Vanderbilt. If you put them in the Big Ten, they would be higher than Purdue, and that's it. And then the Big 12, they're higher than basically everybody, other than Colorado, BYU, Arizona, Utah, Arizona State, Baylor, and TCU. So they're still pretty low. And I'm really interested to see what this looks like next year. Will there be a drastic change in what BC spends? That will be an interesting thing to look at. Then, to get a little bit more bleak, you can look at basketball. And basketball, the highest spenders in the ACC, I'm sure you can guess, are Duke, Syracuse, and Louisville. Louisville had some really poor return on investment in their spending. Duke spent $21.4 million in their financial year 2023, while BC spent 10.2. So they are less than half of what Duke spends. Now, if you compare them to, let's say, UConn spends 13.1. So they are just more, a little bit more They spend just a little bit more than BC, which is crazy because now they've won back-to-back national titles with a much more concise budget, which is crazy. Now, if you were to put BC's higher only than Cal, Georgia Tech, Clemson, and Stanford. Every other team in the conference is higher than them. So that one, they're much more closer to the bottom. Now, that kind of shows you where BC is at in terms of the pecking order and why money is such a tight thing for the Eagles. Now, the last one I thought was really interesting too was Olympic spending. And I think this kind of interweaves one of the biggest issues that BC has. Boston College is 6th, I believe, 6th or 7th in the conference in in Olympic spending. They're behind just Stanford, Notre Dame, Duke, Virginia, UNC, and Florida State. BC is higher than everybody else. So, Olympic sports, I imagine that includes lacrosse, baseball, um, some of the other sports. I mean, BC, what do they have? Like 30, was it 33 sports? So there's probably they have more athletes than a lot of other schools do. So they're putting more money in because they have to. So it makes me wonder too, like, is BC spending too much money on Olympic sports and not on the ones that make them more, put more money into the coffers? Like, the return on investment for football is very different than a return on investment for the swimming team. No offense to anyone who swims, right? I'm just saying that's the natural piece of thing. But BC is a holistic program that wants to support all their student athletes, and because of that, they have a very, very diverse offering in terms of varsity level sports. They spend all that money, and it can't go everywhere else. And you have the basketball team near the bottom, and you have the football team in the middle. But I thought it was interesting, just in general, just the absolute general overview of this little chart here, that Boston College isn't the bottom in spending. They are not near the top, but the thought in terms of the whole ACC, because it's different than the um situation you would be in the SEC. If they were spending the way they were now in the SEC, they'd be getting trounced. But they are kind of in the peer level in the ACC in terms of spending. They're not drastically behind some of these other programs like I think a lot of folks think they are. But I just wanted to bring this up because it shows that BC does spend money, and I'm really interested specifically because football they're like, in like the bottom 7. If they're really going to spend more, how high can they really get by next year? Well, I will be here next year at some point to talk about this. I was interested in this. I hope you guys were too. We'll be back again tomorrow for another episode of Locked On BC. We'll talk more about anything going on in terms of official visit season for football, basketball, transfer portal, and anything else that's going on at Boston College. You're going to get it here on Locked On BC. Make sure to follow me on Twitter at AJ Black 247 and check me out at Eagle Insider. We'll be back again tomorrow for a new episode. I hope you guys will be around. Make sure to hit that like, subscribe, and hit that little bell button too. Keep forgetting to tell you, hit the bell button so you know when I'm going to go live and that you don't miss another episode of Locked On Boston College. Your team every day.